You really want to put those cuffs on me for standing on my own land?" The words left my mouth slow, steady, almost lost under the crackle of a police radio and the low hum of an idling engine baking in the 94-degree heat. But Patricia Whitmore heard them, and she smiled like she'd already won as gravel shifted under the deputy's boots and the metal cuffs glinted inches from my wrists, the sunlight reflecting off their polished surface like a final warning I wasn't supposed to understand. And right behind her, that white SUV sat perfectly angled in the driveway, like it was part of a staged scene, her stage, her neighborhood, her rules, and me, apparently, her next example. I could still smell the fresh asphalt from the patch job they'd done last week, still see the crooked survey stake half buried near the edge of the lot where my father had hammered it in himself 20 years ago, a marker that had outlasted storms, ownership disputes, and time itself. But somehow, according to Patricia, it didn't matter anymore, because she stood there holding a clipboard and a printed notice like it was law, like it overrode everything that came before it, like it erased history with a single signature and a smug expression. She stepped closer, heels clicking against the pavement in sharp, deliberate beats, and pointed at me without hesitation, her voice carrying just enough for the neighbors gathering across the street to hear. He was told this property belongs to the HOA now, and he refused to leave. And I could feel the shift in the air, the subtle weight of eyes watching from behind curtains, from porches, from phones already raised to record what they thought would be a clean, satisfying takedown of some guy who didn't know the rules. And maybe that's what she was counting on, the performance, the pressure, the illusion of authority backed by confidence alone. Because she didn't ask questions, she issued commands, and the deputy, caught between procedure and presentation, glanced at me with that look I'd seen 100 times before, the look that says this is probably simpler than it feels, just comply and move on. But nothing about this was simple, not the land, not the documents folded neatly in the glove compartment of my truck, not the way Patricia had shown up within minutes of me stepping onto this lot like she'd been waiting for this exact moment, rehearsing it, preparing every line, every gesture, every piece of paper she now waved like a weapon. I let my eyes drift down to the notice in her hand, the bold lettering, the official tone, the signature that didn't match any record I knew existed, and I felt that familiar stillness settle in my chest, the kind that comes when you've seen enough to recognize the pattern before anyone else does, when you know the next move before it happens. And I said nothing for a few seconds, just listened to the radio chatter, the distant bark of a dog, the faint rustle of leaves moving in the warm breeze, all of it layering over the tension building in that small strip of driveway like a scene that had already been decided, except it hadn't. Not really, because Patricia kept talking, kept adding details, kept pushing her version of events further than it could hold, and every word she said made it easier to see the cracks forming underneath. "He's trespassing," she repeated, louder this time, more confident, as if volume could turn assumption into fact, and the deputy shifted his stance, the cuffs tilting slightly closer, close enough now that I could see the tiny scratches along the metal, marks left by other situations, other people who hadn't had a reason to stop this from happening. And that's when I finally looked back up at her, really looked, at the certainty in her posture, the way she expected this to end, the way she believed the uniform next to me automatically made her right, and I asked quietly, almost conversationally, "You're sure this is HOA property?" And she didn't hesitate, not even for a second, just nodded with that same confident smile. And that was the moment I knew she had already gone too far to step back. The moment I knew she'd built this entire scene on something that wouldn't survive a single real question. But she didn't know that yet, and what she didn't know was about to change everything. I did not answer her right away because silence has a way of making people fill it with mistakes. And Patricia Whitmore was already doing exactly that as the deputy hesitated just enough for the moment to stretch, the heat pressing down on all of us while a faint breeze carried the dry scent of cut grass across the curb. And I could hear someone across the street whispering, phone still raised, waiting for something dramatic to happen, waiting for me to react the way she expected, but I did not. I just looked past her shoulder at the crooked survey stake again, the one she claimed meant nothing. The one my father had measured out himself with a steel tape and a level on a cool October morning years ago, and I remembered how precise he had been, how he said land does not lie, only people do. and I let that memory sit there for a second before I finally spoke, calm enough that the deputy leaned in slightly to hear me better. Can you show me the official boundary adjustment filed with the county? And that was the first crack, small but sharp, because Patricia blinked, just once, and then recovered quickly, lifting her clipboard higher like it was shield enough. The HOA approved it. That is all that matters, she said. And the confidence was still there but thinner now, stretched over something that did not quite hold, and I nodded slowly, not arguing, just asking. Approved where, exactly? And that question hung there longer than the first, heavier this time, because now the deputy shifted his weight again, the cuffs lowering a fraction, not gone, but no longer certain, and Patricia's voice picked up speed as she answered, adding details that did not connect, referencing meetings, votes, authority that sounded official until you listened closely, until you realized none of it answered the one thing that actually mattered, and every word she added made it clearer that she was building this in real time, stacking assumptions on top of each other, and hoping no one would notice the gaps. I could feel the shift in the deputy's posture now, subtle but real, the way his shoulders squared a little differently, the way his eyes moved from me to her and back again, recalibrating, and I kept my tone even, never raising it, never pushing, because that is how you let someone walk themselves into a corner without ever touching them. And the deed transfer? I asked, glancing toward the lot, toward the uneven line where the grass met the gravel. When was that recorded? And this time there was a pause, longer, noticeable enough that one of the neighbors lowered their phone slightly, like they were starting to sense the story was not going the way they thought, and Patricia's smile flickered, just for a second, before she forced it back. We do not need a deed transfer. The HOA governs this entire area, she said, louder again, trying to bring the momentum back, trying to reassert control, but it did not land the same way. Not now, not with the questions already sitting in the air. The deputy cleared his throat lightly, a small sound but it cut through everything, and he glanced at her. Ma'am, do you have documentation from the county? He asked, and that was when I saw it. The first real sign of uncertainty in her posture, the way her grip tightened on the clipboard, the way her stance shifted half an inch back, like she was adjusting to ground that suddenly felt less stable, and I could almost map the realization forming behind her eyes, that this was not going to be as easy as she thought, that the script she had prepared did not cover this version of events, but she pushed forward anyway, doubling down, because people like her always do. The HOA has authority here, she repeated, more forcefully now, as if saying it enough times would make it true, and I let out a small breath, not a sigh, just a quiet acknowledgement of where we were now, because everything she had just said, every claim, every statement, was exactly what I needed it to be, not for me, but for what came next, and I reached slowly toward my truck, not in any sudden movement, just enough to draw attention without raising alarm, and the deputy's eyes followed my hand instinctively, cautious but not tense, and I could feel the entire scene tightening again, the anticipation returning, but different this time, less certain, more curious, and I said, still calm, still measured, I have something in there that might help clear this up, and Patricia laughed, a quick, sharp sound, meant to dismiss whatever I was about to do. There is nothing you can show that changes this, she said, but her voice did not carry the same weight anymore, not after the questions, not after the hesitation, and I paused for just a second before opening the door, letting that moment stretch again, because timing matters, because sometimes the difference between chaos and clarity is just a few seconds of patience, and what she did not realize, what none of them realized yet, was that every step she had taken, every word she had spoken, had already set the stage for everything that was about to unfold. I opened the truck door slowly, the hinge creaking just enough to cut through the quiet tension that had settled over the driveway, and the heat trapped inside rolled out in a wave carrying the faint smell of leather and paper, the kind of smell that lingers in places where documents matter more than words. And for a second nobody moved, not the deputy, not Patricia, not the small audience that had gathered across the street, all of them watching like something important was about to happen, even if they did not understand why. And I reached into the passenger seat and picked up the worn leather folder that had been sitting there the entire time, the edges softened from years of use, the weight of it familiar in my hand. And when I turned back, I did not rush. I did not make any sudden motions. I just stepped back onto the gravel and let the door close behind me with a solid, final sound that seemed louder than it should have been, and Patricia let out a short laugh again, but it sounded thinner now, less certain. "This is not going to change anything," she said, adjusting her grip on the clipboard like she needed to remind herself she was still in control, and I nodded slightly, not agreeing, just acknowledging the moment, because control is a fragile thing when it is built on assumptions, and I had already seen enough to know hers was starting to slip. I opened the folder just enough to slide out a single document, not the whole stack, just one page, clean, official, the kind of paper that carries weight without needing explanation, and I held it where the deputy could see first, not her, because the order mattered, always, and the deputy leaned in a fraction, his expression shifting from routine to attentive as his eyes scanned the header, the county seal, the recorded filing number, and I could see the exact moment it registered, the subtle tightening of his jaw. The way his posture adjusted again, more grounded now, more deliberate, and Patricia noticed it too. Of course she did, because people like her read reactions faster than facts, and she stepped forward quickly, heels clicking sharper this time, trying to reclaim the space. "You do not need to look at that, officer. This is HOA jurisdiction," she said, but her voice no longer filled the space the way it had before. It bounced instead, thinner, less convincing, and the deputy did not look away from the document. "Ma'am, I need to verify this," he replied, calm but firm, and that was when the balance shifted, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough that you could feel it if you were paying attention, the kind of shift that changes outcomes long before anyone says it out loud. I let the silence stretch again as he read, the faint sound of paper moving under his fingers mixing with the distant hum of a passing car somewhere down the street, and I could feel the eyes on us growing heavier, the curiosity sharpening into something else now, something closer to doubt, and Patricia crossed her arms tightly, the clipboard pressed against her side, her stance narrowing like she was trying to hold her ground against something she could not quite see yet. "That does not override HOA authority," she said, quicker this time, almost interrupting the quiet, and I glanced at her briefly, not challenging, just observing, because she was still playing the same script, still relying on the same assumptions, and I spoke again, just enough to guide the moment without forcing it. "Check the parcel number at the bottom," I said to the deputy, my voice even, and he did, his finger tracing the line, matching it against something on his own device, and the pause that followed was longer, heavier, the kind that does not need explanation because everyone can feel it settling into place. And when he finally looked up, it was not at me first, it was at her, and that alone told the story. Before he said a single word, Patricia shook her head immediately, almost instinctively, like rejecting the outcome could still change it. "There must be a mistake," she said, but the certainty was gone now, replaced by something sharper, something closer to urgency, and I closed the folder gently, not snapping it shut, just letting it rest back in my hand, because this part was never about overwhelming her. It was about letting the truth surface at its own pace, and I could see it happening now, in real time. The realization starting to form not just in the deputy's expression, but in the quiet shift of the people watching, the way phones lowered slightly, the way whispers changed tone, and I took a small step back, giving the space room to settle into what it was becoming, because what Patricia had built here, this entire scene, this accusation, this performance, it was already starting to unravel, thread by thread, and she was the one still pulling at it, not realizing that every move she made now was only tightening the knot around herself. The air felt different now, heavier but quieter, like something invisible had shifted and everyone could sense it without fully understanding why, and the deputy lowered the document just slightly, not dropping it, not dismissing it, but holding it with a kind of careful attention that had not been there before, his eyes moving between the page and Patricia as if recalculating everything he thought he knew about this situation. And I stayed exactly where I was, not stepping forward, not pressing the advantage, because moments like this do not need force, they need space, and Patricia filled that space immediately. "That paperwork does not change HOA enforcement authority," she said, faster now, the words coming out tighter, less controlled, and I could hear the shift in her tone, the way confidence had started to turn into insistence, and that is always the first sign that someone knows. even if they will not admit it yet, that something is wrong. The deputy looked at her. Again, this time longer, his brow slightly furrowed. Ma'am, this shows private ownership with no recorded transfer, he said, his voice steady but no longer neutral. And that was when the silence around us deepened, not empty, but full, like every person watching was leaning in just a little closer, waiting to see which version of reality would hold. And Patricia shook her head quickly, stepping closer again, her heels grinding lightly against the gravel. The HOA expanded its boundaries last year. We voted on it. Everyone agreed, she said. But even as she spoke, there was a hesitation, a small break between her words that had not been there before, like she was trying to convince herself as much as anyone else. And I tilted my head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the statement without challenging it directly, because contradiction would only give her something to push against. And instead I asked, calmly, filed with the county. And that question landed differently this time, heavier, sharper, because now it was not just a detail, it was the entire foundation, and she did not answer right away, her eyes flicking briefly toward the clipboard, then back to the deputy. And I could see it clearly now, the moment where certainty turns into searching, where someone starts looking for something that should already be there, and does not find it. The deputy shifted his stance again, the cuffs now hanging loosely at his side. No longer part of the immediate moment, just an object he had not yet put away. And he glanced down at his device, tapping through something quickly, verifying, cross-checking, and the faint sound of those taps echoed louder than they should have in the quiet. And Patricia let out a short breath, forcing a small laugh that did not quite connect. This is unnecessary, officer. This is a simple trespassing issue, she said. But the words felt thinner now, like they were losing weight as soon as they left her mouth, and I watched her carefully, not with hostility, just with attention, because everything she did now mattered more than anything she had done before, every reaction, every shift, every word, and I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her grip tightened again, the way her posture was no longer perfectly aligned, and I realized she had not expected resistance, not real resistance. Not the kind that does not argue but instead quietly dismantles, piece by piece. I took a slow breath, letting it out evenly, and for a second my eyes drifted back to that survey stake again, still slightly crooked but firmly planted, still exactly where it had been placed years ago, untouched by votes, by assumptions, by anyone's interpretation of authority. And I remembered standing there with my father, the sound of the metal hammer striking the wood, the careful measurements, the certainty that comes from doing something the right way, the legal way, and I brought my attention back to the present. Just as the deputy looked up again, his expression no longer uncertain, not fully resolved yet, but closer, and he addressed Patricia directly. Do you have any official county documentation supporting the boundary change? And this time there was no immediate answer, no quick response, just a brief, noticeable pause. And in that pause, everything she had built seemed to hang in the air without support, and the neighbors watching shifted slightly, the energy changing from expectation to curiosity to something quieter, something more aware. And Patricia finally spoke, but her voice had changed, not louder, not stronger, just sharper, edged with something that had not been there before. We handle this internally, she said, and that was it. The moment where the gap between what she believed and what actually mattered became impossible to ignore, because internal does not override recorded, and authority claimed does not replace authority documented, and I did not need to say that, I did not need to explain it, because the deputy already understood, and the way he exhaled slowly, the way he lowered the document just enough while still holding it, told me everything I needed to know, that the direction of this situation had changed completely, even if Patricia had not accepted it yet. And as the heat continued to press down and the quiet stretched around us, I could feel the next moment approaching, the one where assumption finally gives way to reality, and once that line is crossed, there is no going back. The deputy did not speak right away, and that silence carried more weight than anything he could have said, his eyes still on the document, his thumb pressing lightly against the edge as if grounding himself in something solid, while everything else shifted. And Patricia took a small step forward again, not as confident this time, but determined, like she believed if she just pushed hard enough reality would bend back into place. We enforce the rules here, officer, That is how this neighborhood works, she said, and I could hear the strain now, the effort behind each word, the way she was trying to rebuild control out of something that had already started to fall apart. And the deputy finally exhaled, a slow, measured breath, before lowering the paper just enough to meet her eyes directly. "Ma'am, HOA rules do not override recorded property ownership," he said, and the words landed clean, simple, final, cutting through everything else that had been set up to this point. And for a moment Patricia just stood there, staring at him like she had not heard correctly, like the script had skipped a line she did not know how to recover from. And then she shook her head again, sharper this time. "That is not correct. We were given authority," she insisted. But now it sounded less like a statement and more like a question she did not want answered. I shifted my weight slightly on the gravel, feeling it crunch under my boots, and glanced once more toward that survey stake, still standing where it always had. And I let my voice come in quietly, not to challenge, not to escalate, just to anchor the moment. "Authority has to be recorded," I said, and I could feel the attention snap back toward me, not because I raised my voice, but because I did not. Because calm carries differently when everything else is starting to unravel. And Patricia turned toward me quickly, her expression tightening. "You do not get to explain how this works," she said. But there was something missing now, something that had been there at the beginning and was gone, and that absence was louder than anything she could say. The deputy glanced between us again, then down at his device, tapping through another set of records, verifying what he already suspected. And I watched the small details, the way his shoulders settled, the way his stance widened. Slightly, the subtle shift from uncertainty to procedure. And that was when I knew the moment had passed the point of return, not dramatically, not with a single statement, but through a series of small, undeniable confirmations that stacked together until there was only one direction left. Across the street, someone lowered their phone completely now, the recording no longer matching the story they expected to capture. And a faint murmur moved through the small group of neighbors, not loud enough to make out words, but enough to signal that the narrative had changed, and Patricia heard it too. I could see it in the way her posture stiffened, the way she turned slightly as if to reclaim that audience. But there was nothing to reclaim anymore, not with the deputy standing there holding official documentation that contradicted everything. She had built this on. This property was never transferred, the deputy said. More clearly now, more firmly, and he gestured lightly toward the document in his hand. "There is no record of any HOA expansion affecting this parcel." And that was it. The line drawn not by volume or authority claimed, but by something simple and verifiable, and Patricia's response came slower this time, her voice dropping just a fraction. "There must be something missing," she said, and for the first time, it did not sound like confidence at all. It sounded like doubt. I let the silence sit again, not filling it, not rushing to finish what had already been decided, because this part matters, the space where realization has time to settle, where people see the difference between what they believed and what is actually there. And I could feel it settling now, in the deputy, in the neighbors, even in Patricia herself, though she had not accepted it yet. And I adjusted the folder slightly in my hand, not opening it again, not needing to, because everything that needed to be shown had already been seen, and I said, evenly, "You might want to check how that notice was issued." And the words were not loud, not sharp, but they carried, because they pointed to something bigger than just this moment, something beyond the accusation, beyond the driveway, and the deputy's eyes shifted back to her again, more focused now, more intentional. And Patricia did not answer right away, her grip tightening on the clipboard, her gaze flicking down for just a second before coming back up. And in that small, almost invisible movement, I saw it clearly, the first real crack in the foundation she had built, the moment where certainty finally gives way to the realization that this is not going to end the way she planned. The shift was no longer subtle now. It had settled into something undeniable, the kind of quiet clarity that changes how everyone stands, how everyone breathes. And I could see it in the deputy's posture as he straightened slightly, no longer caught between two versions of the same story, but firmly grounded in one that actually held up, and Patricia felt it too, even if she was not ready to admit it, because her eyes moved quickly now, not with confidence, but with calculation, scanning for something she could still use, something she could still control, and she tightened her grip on the clipboard like it was the last piece of structure she had left. "There has to be another document," she said. But the words came out uneven, like they had lost their foundation halfway through, and I watched her carefully, not with satisfaction, not with anger, just with the same steady attention I had kept from the beginning. Because this was the moment where everything she had built started collapsing. Under its own weight, the deputy lowered his device slowly, his expression no longer uncertain, no longer neutral, but measured in a different way, more deliberate, and he spoke again, not loudly, but with a clarity that carried through the heat and the stillness around us. "Ma'am, if this notice was issued without proper authority, that is a problem." And those words landed differently, not just correcting her, but reframing the entire situation, shifting the focus away from me completely and placing it squarely on her actions. And I saw the exact second she realized that, the way her shoulders stiffened, the way her stance narrowed again, like she was trying to hold on to something that was already slipping through her hands. Across the street, the quiet murmur grew just enough to be noticeable, not loud, but present, and the people watching were no longer waiting for me to be taken away, they were watching her, watching what she would say next, and that kind of attention changes everything, because now the pressure was not on me anymore. It was on her. I adjusted the folder slightly in my hand, feeling the smooth edge of the paper inside, the recorded filing number still clear in my mind, and I let my voice come in again, calm and steady. "The parcel has not changed in over 20 years, I said, not as a challenge, just as a fact, and I could see the deputy nod almost imperceptibly, aligning that statement with what he had already verified, and Patricia shook her head. "Again, quicker now. We updated the community boundaries last year," she repeated, but the repetition did not strengthen her position. It weakened it, because there was nothing behind it anymore. No documentation, no record, just insistence, and insistence does not hold up under scrutiny. The deputy glanced back at her, his tone still controlled but firmer now. "Internal HOA decisions do not override county records," he said, and that was the line that closed the gap completely. The clear distinction between what she believed and what actually governed the situation, and for a moment she just stood there, her expression caught between frustration and disbelief, like she was trying to reconcile two realities that no longer matched, and I could feel the heat pressing down again, the sound of a distant lawn mower somewhere in the neighborhood, blending into the background, ordinary life continuing around a moment that had quietly shifted everything. I took a slow breath, letting it out evenly, and glanced once more at the survey stake, still in place, still unchanged, a simple piece of wood that had outlasted every claim she had just made. And I thought about how easy it is for people to assume authority when no one questions it, how quickly that assumption falls apart when someone does, and I brought my focus back to the present. Just as the deputy spoke again, this time with a tone that carried a different kind of weight. "I am going to need to document this properly," he said. And those words were not dramatic. They were procedural, but they marked a turning point more clearly than anything else that had been said so far. Because procedure does not follow assumption, it follows evidence, and the evidence was no longer on her side. Patricia opened her mouth as if to respond, then paused, her gaze dropping briefly to the clipboard before lifting again. And in that small hesitation, I saw it fully, the moment where control was no longer hers, not because it had been taken, but because it had never actually been there in the first place, and everything she had relied on to maintain it had just been quietly, methodically dismantled, one question at a time, one answer at a time, until there was nothing left to hold it up. The deputy's words did not echo, they settled, firm and grounded, and I watched the moment land fully this time, not just on Patricia, but on everyone standing within earshot. Because when something shifts from accusation to documentation, it changes what people are looking at, and more importantly, who they are looking at. And now every eye that had been on me at the beginning had turned toward her. Not aggressively, not dramatically, but with a quiet attention that carries far more weight than noise ever could. And Patricia felt it. I could see it in the way her posture adjusted again, her shoulders pulling back as if she could rebuild control through presence alone. "This is being misunderstood," she said, slower now, more deliberate, like she was choosing each word carefully instead of letting them spill out. And that change alone told me everything, because people only start choosing Words when they know the wrong ones matter. The deputy nodded slightly, not agreeing, just acknowledging that she was still speaking, and then he glanced down at the clipboard in her hand. "Ma'am, I need to see that notice," he said, and there was no hesitation in his tone anymore, no uncertainty, just a clear step forward in a process that had already begun, and Patricia paused for a fraction of a second before handing it over, her fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary, like she was reluctant to let go of it, and I watched that small hesitation carefully, because sometimes the smallest delays reveal the biggest truths. The paper made a faint sound as it shifted from her hand to his, the dry rustle cutting cleanly through the quiet, and he held it up, scanning it quickly, his eyes moving across the printed lines, the signature, the formatting, and I could see it again, that subtle tightening in his expression. Not confusion this time, but recognition, the kind that comes when something does not align the way it should, and he flipped the page slightly, checking the back as if expecting to find something missing, and then he looked back at her. "Where was this filed?" he asked, and the question was simple, but it carried everything that had been building up to this point. Patricia straightened, her chin lifting just enough to signal she was not backing down. "It was issued by the HOA board," she said, and the answer came quicker than before, but it lacked something, the certainty that had defined her at the start, and the deputy held the paper up slightly, not confrontational, just clear. "There is no filing reference here," he said, and that was the moment the gap widened into something visible, something no longer abstract or technical, but tangible, something everyone could understand even without knowing the details, and I could feel it ripple through the small crowd, the quiet murmur shifting again, softer now, more reflective, like people were reassessing what they had just witnessed from the beginning. I shifted my stance slightly, the gravel crunching under my boots, and let my gaze move briefly to the edge of the lot, to that same survey stake, unchanged, steady, and I thought about how something so small could hold more truth than everything that had been said out loud, and I brought my focus back just as the deputy lowered the notice, his expression settling into something more official now, more procedural. "Ma'am, issuing a notice like this without proper authority can create legal issues," he said, and the words were not loud, not aggressive, but they carried a weight that changed the entire tone of the situation, because now it was no longer about me being somewhere I should not be. It was about her actions and whether they held up under scrutiny, and Patricia's response came slower this time, her voice tighter. "We were acting within our rights," she said, but it sounded less like a statement and more like something she needed to believe, and I did not interrupt. I did not add anything, because this part did not need my voice anymore. It was unfolding exactly as it needed to, driven by facts instead of reactions. The deputy nodded once, then glanced briefly toward me, not for confirmation, but acknowledgement, before returning his attention to her. "I am going to note all of this," he said, and that sentence, simple as it was, marked the full transition from assumption to record, from accusation to accountability, and I could see it settle in Patricia's expression, the realization that this was no longer a situation she could direct, no longer something she could control through confidence alone, and for a brief moment, her gaze dropped again, just slightly, before lifting back up, and in that movement, I saw it clearly, the shift from certainty to consequence, the point where the story she had constructed no longer supported her, and everything that followed would be shaped not by what she claimed, but by what could actually be proven. The moment settled into something irreversible, not loud, not dramatic, but absolute, and I could feel it in the way the deputy carefully folded the notice and held it between his fingers like it now belonged to a different kind of process, one that Patricia no longer controlled, and the heat pressed down harder, or maybe it just felt that way now that everything had slowed, every movement more deliberate, every word more measured, and Patricia stood there, still trying to hold her posture together, but the edges of it had softened. The certainty that once filled her voice now replaced by something quieter, something uncertain. "This is being blown out of proportion," she said, and even she seemed to hear how different it sounded, how far it had drifted from where she started, and the deputy shook his head slightly, not dismissive, just firm. "Ma'am, issuing a formal notice without proper authority is not a minor issue," he said, and his tone carried that same steady weight, not emotional, not reactive, just grounded in procedure, and that is what made it land. I remained where I was, not stepping forward, not adding pressure, because this was no longer about me proving anything. That part had already passed, and now it was about what came next, about how the situation would be recorded, how it would move forward beyond this driveway, beyond this moment, and I could see Patricia realizing that too. The way her eyes flicked briefly toward the neighbors again. But this time there was no performance left, no audience to win over, just quiet observation. And that changes how people stand, how they breathe, how they choose their next words. We were protecting the community, she said, softer now, and that sentence hung in the air for a second, not challenged, not interrupted, just there, and I let it sit, because sometimes people need to hear their own words in silence to understand what they sound like, and the deputy nodded once, acknowledging it without agreeing. That may be your intent, but it has to be done within legal limits, he replied. And there it was again, that clear line, the one she had crossed without realizing it, and I watched her closely, not with judgment, just with attention, because this was the part where everything internal becomes visible, the moment where someone understands that the rules they thought they could shape do not actually move. I adjusted my grip on the folder slightly, feeling the familiar texture under my fingers, and my gaze drifted again to the edge of the lot, to the survey stake still standing where it had always been, unchanged, steady, and it struck me how quiet truth is compared to assumption, how it does not need to raise its voice, does not need to convince anyone, it just waits to be verified, and when it is, everything else falls away on its own. The deputy stepped slightly to the side, giving himself a clearer line of sight between both of us, and began noting details, his pen moving steadily across a small pad. The sound faint but consistent, and each stroke seemed to mark another step away from the version of events Patricia had tried to create, and she watched him, her expression tightening again, but differently this time, not defensive, not assertive, just aware, and that awareness carried more weight than anything she had said before. Across the street, the last of the phones lowered completely, the moment no longer something to capture, but something to process, and the quiet that followed felt deeper, more grounded, like the entire scene had shifted into something real after starting as something staged, and I took a slow breath, letting it out evenly, not rushing anything, because this was not about speed, it was about certainty, and certainty does not need to hurry. I am going to recommend this be reviewed, the deputy said finally, his voice steady, and that sentence marked the next phase clearly, moving this out of the driveway and into something official, something documented, something that could not be reshaped by tone or presence. And Patricia's shoulders lowered just slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to show that she understood what that meant, even if she had not fully accepted it yet. And for the first time since this began, she did not immediately respond. She just stood there, holding the clipboard loosely now, no longer gripping it like a shield, and in that stillness, I could see the full arc of what had happened, from confidence to control, from control to uncertainty, and now from uncertainty to consequence, all without a single raised voice, all without anything more than questions, documents, and time. And as the deputy finished writing and the quiet settled around us once more, it was clear that what had started as an accusation had ended as something entirely different, something that would not simply disappear once the heat faded and the crowd moved on, something that would follow its own path now, guided not by assumption, but by record. The deputy finished writing and closed his notepad with a quiet, final motion that seemed to seal everything that had just happened, and for a moment no one moved. Not me, not Patricia, not even the neighbors who had now gone completely still, like they were waiting for something else to break the silence. But nothing did, because there was nothing left to prove, nothing left to argue. And that was the part most people never expect, that the end of something like this does not come with noise. It comes with stillness. The deputy looked at me briefly, his expression steady, respectful in a quiet, professional way, and then back at Patricia. "This will be reviewed through the proper channels," he said, and there was no threat in his voice, no edge, just a simple statement of what comes next when facts are no longer in dispute. And Patricia nodded slowly, almost automatically, like her body was catching up to a reality her mind had not fully processed yet, and she adjusted the clipboard in her hands, But she did not raise it again, did not use it as a shield, just held it loosely at her side as if it had lost whatever meaning it once carried. I let my gaze drift across the lot one more time. The sunlight stretching long shadows across the uneven gravel, the faint shimmer of heat rising off the driveway. And there it was again, that survey stake, still planted exactly where it had been placed years ago, untouched by everything that had just unfolded, and I felt a quiet kind of clarity settle in my chest, the kind that does not come from winning, but from knowing that nothing had actually needed to be fought for in the first place, only verified. The deputy stepped back slightly, giving both of us space, the situation no longer active, no longer tense, just resolved in the only way that matters, through record, and Patricia finally looked at me directly, not with the same sharpness as before, not with control, but with something quieter, something closer to realization, and for a second it seemed like she might say something, might try to explain or justify or reclaim some part of what had happened, but she did not. She just held that look, then glanced away, and that was enough, because not every ending needs words, some just need acknowledgement. Across the street, the small group of neighbors began to shift, slowly dispersing, conversations starting in low voices, no longer about what they thought they were going to see, but about what they had actually witnessed, and I could feel that shift too. The way perception changes once something real replaces assumption. And I turned slightly, reaching for the truck door again, the metal warm under my hand from sitting in the sun, and for a brief second I paused, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to take in the quiet, the absence of tension, the way everything had settled back into place without force, without escalation. I opened the door and set the folder back on the seat, the leather resting exactly where it had been before any of this started, and when I closed the door, the sound felt different this time, not final, not heavy, just complete, like closing a chapter that had already written its own ending, and I turned back once more, my eyes meeting the deputy's in a brief nod of understanding, then moving past him to the edge of the lot, to that simple line where fact and assumption had been tested and only one had remained, and I stepped forward onto the gravel again, feeling it shift under my boots, the same ground, the same space, unchanged despite everything that had just happened. Patricia stood a few feet away now, no longer directing anything, no longer controlling the moment, just present in it, and the clipboard at her side caught the light for a second before she turned slightly, walking back toward her SUV without another word, the sound of her heels softer now, less deliberate, fading into the background as she opened the door and stepped inside, the engine still running from earlier, the hum blending back into the normal sounds of the neighborhood. I watched her go for a moment, not out of triumph, not out of judgment, but out of understanding, because this was never about her losing. It was about the truth holding its ground, and once that happens, everything else falls into place whether people are ready for it or not. And as the deputy finished up and the last of the tension dissolved into the warm afternoon air, I stood there for one more second, letting the quiet settle fully, before turning back to what had always been mine, knowing that some lines do not need to be defended loudly. They just need to be drawn correctly and left to stand.